Okay.
Well, hello, Eddie. We met
Yeah.
over Twitter, and this is very exciting. A crossover podcast YouTube extravaganza. Um, we got Eddie here, and I am Zach, and I do a blog and talk about what angers me at certain times, which is always politics. And Eddie's a smart guy that I've met over Twitter, and he educates me on macroeconomics. And we wanted to talk about crypto, Bitcoin, Doge, whatever, because most of the time, I think most of the people who talk about those things are crackpots. But Eddie is actually super smart. So I want to hear from him.
Awesome. Yeah, we were. This is the first time doing something like this with Zach, and we interact on Twitter every now and then. And I noticed that he's interested in economics, um, which is what I love to talk about on Twitter. Um, so yeah, we said, hey, let's do a video.
And
So there we
Eddie
go.
Eddie is on Twitter. He's not only smart, but he's also nice, which you don't find anywhere on Twitter. That's a unicorn. And so I am very excited to talk with him today. Um, Eddie, what's your take on cryptocurrency in general? If you were to explain to a dummy what is cryptocurrency and why is it good, or why is it what it is, what would you say?
So there's many angles. I mean, talking about crypto um, gets you into talking about the entire macroeconomic situation. So there's so many angles that I actually want to start with kind of where you're at and ask you, you've mentioned that usually you just think these people talking about crypto are just, crackpots. But what is your thinking, up until now? Why is crypto crazy? Why are people who believe in crypto, just crazy, insane?
Oh, okay, crypto. And here's here's the thing, is it's kind of the people who talk about crypto kind of lead me into thinking that crypto is crazy. It's
Right,
kind of the anti-establishment people who are,
right.
oh, we've got a, I don't know how to explain them very well, but it's the
Yeah,
people that you
I know
think
what you're
of
talking about.
when
Right.
you're like, oh, we gotta uh, down with the system. Oh, every
Yeah.
side, both
Right.
sides are wrong, and our situation will never be better. And so, people that I generally think of are as wrong on other levels, or just not necessarily wrong, but not
Yeah.
thinking it through super. They take kind of a simple point and
Right.
then they kind of expand upon it. That's kind of where I get my ideas of crypto, is I kind of say, okay, it's a simple idea. Is it better than what we already have, or is it just different and new
Right.
and exciting?
So there's a lot of sort of Austrian economic thinking kind of running through the Bitcoin community. There's definitely a lot of that, a lot of kind of libertarianism and kind of get a
Yeah.
the end the Fed, get away from the government, don't let the government confiscate your stuff,
Yeah,
which used to be gold, but now it's Bitcoin for these.
exactly. That's where, yeah, yeah. When
Yeah.
I think the guys who are buying gold and stockpiling rations and
Yeah.
guns and
Ah,
ammunition
yeah.
and Bitcoin.
Yeah. So let's talk about the Austrian economists. So the Austrian economists, a lot of them are almost, or the people who subscribe to, the Austrian thinking. A lot of them are sort of against the Federal Reserve, and they sort of moralize about it. They will
Mm,
say, the Federal Reserve is just printing, trillions and trillions of dollars of, what they would consider sort of fake money.
mm.
It's not backed by anything. It's not backed by gold. It is simply, um, there are, I've heard it called, the money that we use,
Hmm.
the fiat money, the U.S. dollar, which the Federal Reserve is in control of expanding the supply of that money. Um, I've heard it called IOU nothings. IOU nothing, because their liabilities. This is probably getting a little bit too technical, but their liabilities of the Fed, which, once upon, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, before we left the gold standard, those would have been IOUs for gold.
Yeah.
And so, in the past, before the Great Depression and FDR, the Federal Reserve used to have a gold window that, anybody could take their US dollars to the local Federal Reserve Bank and exchange it for gold. And they could also go to their local bank, and the local bank could go to the Federal Reserve Bank. So it was all, backed up by gold. Gold was the base money, and the paper notes were just promises of gold. And so
Hmm.
it's a very interesting that happens. During the Great Depression with FDR, FDR, closes the gold window, closes the retail gold window. So he says, the US dollar will no longer be exchangeable for gold for ordinary people. And he actually confiscates the gold in the system. Like, everybody is required to turn in their gold for a certain amount of paper money.
Hmm.
So that's probably where it gets into the mythos of the gold bug. That did happen, which is interesting to think about. After the Great Depression, the dollar is still based on gold under the Bretton Woods system, but it is only exchangeable for gold for other countries.
Hmm.
And so within the country, everybody's supposed to be using the paper dollar, but then when you go and do international trade, obviously other countries have their own currency, and so in order to make that trade, make that exchange, then everything is, the US dollar becomes kind of the second tier base money, and gold is still at the top.
Hmm.
So, coming out of World War II, US has most of the gold reserves in the world anyways. And so they set it up so that, um, normally everybody just exchanges things for dollars, and the other central banks, they save up US dollars in their central bank. And then every now and then, if they want to, then they can um, go to the US and say, hey, I want, gold for my dollars. So send me the gold.
Hmm.
That continues until 1970, and you have inflation, you have the gold shock, and then Nixon closes that gold window, and says we're no longer going to give, even other nations gold for their dollars. So from the 1970s until now, it's fiat currency. It's paper. It's technically, on balance sheets, it shows up, on the Federal Reserve balance sheet, it shows up as a liability of the Federal Reserve,
Hmm.
but that's a very special liability, which is not actually exchangeable for anything. So if you go to the Federal Reserve with the US dollar and say, give me my, gold, they say, no, there's no gold. You
Yeah.
can have another dollar
Yeah.
in exchange for it. We can exchange dollars.
Yeah.
But there's nothing else that is owed under the new rule, under the new rules.
So it has value because we say it has value.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. That's
It's really interesting to think about because um, it's kind of how I've heard it explained is that cash nowadays, the dollar, does not have value except for the fact that we believe it has value. And
yeah.
because we believe it has value, it does have value.
Yeah.
And so each dollar is not necessarily a liability to the country, it's more of a liability of the companies within a country to
Yeah. Absolutely.
produce stuff for people who turn that dollar in. Is that, am I explaining that well?
Yeah, I think that's a great explanation. The dollar's value, I would consider to be what Soros calls reflexive. It's reflexive value. There's reflexivity involved in it, and it does have value in the market, and everybody, for the most part, trust that a dollar has value. They'll accept it for whatever they're selling or for their work or whatever. And they do that because they know that they will be able to turn around and give the dollar to somebody else, and
Hmm.
somebody else will give something to them of value for it. So it has value because other people have believe it has value,
Hmm.
and other people believe it has value because other people.
So the more
That's
people
very
you can
simple.
get to believe something has value, the more value it has.
Yeah,
Ish.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. It has value because people believe it has value. Um, and I mean, that's one of those very interesting. I actually consider that, the source idea of reflexivity and these sort of circular loops are actually quite common in economics. It's like, a lot of times when stock prices go up, a lot of times many of the participants are buying the stock because they think the price will continue to go up,
Hmm.
and as a result of them buying the stock, the price therefore continues to go up.
Wow, this
And
is
so
a really good lead into cryptocurrency. You got into reflexivity and how we believe something has value, so we buy
yeah,
it, and then it does have value. And now we're getting into crypto, which may
yeah,
be connected. I see what you're
yeah,
doing.
absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Uh,
So
so,
where
is
do
there
we
anywhere
land?
you want to go more about the dollar before we go into um, Bitcoin or cryptocurrency?
So I guess the one thing I want to say now is that, you know, fundamentally from that perspective, the U.S. dollar currently, because it has no backing, um, it's not fundamentally in a stronger position than a cryptocurrency. It is on the basis of, if you look at the market cap of the U.S. dollar, how many people are holding it for how much value, how much market cap value the U.S. dollar has.
You're
Um,
saying in terms of being a fiat
Prominent.
currency, they're both
Yeah,
fiat currencies. They both have
exactly.
value in their proposition of not being anything.
They will both have value if the people accept them as having value, and they
Okay,
both will
yeah.
not have value if at some point in the future the people do not accept them as having value. They could both um, increase, stay stable, or also lose value.
Okay, I think that's a really good explanation. And I think um, not that I need to, but I totally am on board and agree with you so far.
Hmm.
Um,
Cool.
all right. Cryptocurrency. Okay, so should we talk about blockchain first, or should we talk about what do you think is important to go first?
So there's something I'm putting off to talk about later, which is how it feeds into the macroeconomics, and that's a huge
Yeah.
thing. I have a whole body of thought that I'm calling capital consumption theory,
Okay. Yeah.
that relates to that, and that there's quite a lot of material there. The blockchain, just as a simple introduction for anyone who doesn't know about blockchain is basically a public ledger. And so, if you go to the bank, something very interesting happens at the bank. Um, Most people think that they have money at the bank. And I would actually consider the way I would think of it is that what you have at the bank is actually not money. Because you may take say $200 and go deposit at the bank, and the bank is not going to keep that $200 for you in their safe ready for you to take it out. They're actually going to take that money and they're going to lend it to somebody else. And after they lend it, then that person deposits it at another bank, and so on and so forth. So it just, the dollar itself that you deposited actually just goes everywhere. It can
Recycles over and
circulate.
over and over and over
Right.
again through the
But what
economy.
you have at the bank, in fact, is a promise of money. So what you have at the bank is that the banker essentially, writes down, Zach today deposited $200. So his, account just went up now. Instead of having, X amount of dollars in his account, he has X plus 200. So you have essentially a ledger entry, which represents a promise by the bank that at any point in time that you want to um, withdraw that money and get some money out, the bank has promised that they will find some money for you somewhere, and they will immediately make that available to you the day that you come to the bank. It's
Makes
promised.
sense.
It's not actually money. So Bitcoin is a public ledger. So the public ledger, the idea behind it is that you get rid of the centralized um, entity, you get rid of the bank, and you just have a public ledger, which the miners basically maintain that ledger, and it's set up so that nobody can mess with the books, and it's set up so that if I say Zach, I'm sending you $200 worth of Bitcoin, and then I go in and make that transfer, then the ledger gets edited and it says $200 has now gone from Eddie's account to Zach's account. Zach's $200 richer, or zero point zero 0.01 Bitcoin richer. Eddie is zero point zero 0.01 Bitcoin poorer, and that's the ledger.
So
That's the books.
the way I've heard it explained as is, instead of having one point of the record of how much each person has, like the bank is one point. Instead, they have it with blockchain. You have uh, thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not millions, probably not millions, right? But millions of points of reference
Yeah.
all talking to each other at the same time as to who has what amount at what time. And so, in order to hack, it's actually a lot more difficult to hack a million PCs at once than it is to hack one extremely secure point.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and so I've actually always been interested in what are these Bitcoin miners, and the way you've explained it to me, they're actually the ledger keepers. They're the accountants. And I always thought like, oh, miners are like doing math problems for people, and
Yeah. Well,
some guy just
right.
really wants to know these math problems.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
apparently, no, they've been just like doing a bunch of record keeping.
Right.
So that actually makes a lot more sense. Thank you for explaining that, because I've always thought about what are Bitcoin miners?
Yeah.
They're
Well, the name mining is like a little. It sort of leads people astray a little bit because you imagined like these miners
yeah,
like mining Bitcoin and like
yeah,
pulling it out of the earth or something.
yeah.
Um, but the system is actually set up so that they are receiving the Bitcoin initially, but they're doing that in exchange for maintaining the network that allows the Bitcoin to have um, to have meaning, and that allows that ledger
They're getting
to stay.
compensated for their services.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, now, hey, you know what? Right now, I've already learned one thing is that miners do not have any pickaxes. All right. Bitcoin miners, no pickaxes. Got it. Got it. We're good.
Right. Very good.
All right. So, blockchain, thousands of points instead of one point. It's really cool. Some people are talking about using it for voting. Would be interesting. We'll see if that actually comes around. No one wants to do any reform to voting. We all want to just go and cast our one vote because that's the way it's always
Yeah.
done. Okay, okay, okay. Let's not get political here.
So I think we can get into the macroeconomics now. I mean, we've got the basics. We know what Bitcoin basically is. We know what fiat currency basically is, and how those stand to each other.
Okay.
And then, if we go back to that, those Austrian economics,
Okay, yeah. Here's where I
that.
wanted to ask you one question. Are you pro Austrian economics? Are you anti Fed
So I'm
morally?
not anti-Fed.
Okay.
I've looked at, some of the Austrian economics, some of the thinking, and there is a lot that I agree with. But lately, I've sort of evolved away from that thinking, and there's a lot that I also disagree with them.
Okay.
So, to answer simply the question about the Fed, um, and this is a bit of a leap, which requires a whole lot of explanation.
Yeah.
I don't think the Fed should be ended. I think the Fed should open an account for every man, woman, and child in the nation,
US
and
digital wallet.
right, and deposit a basic income, a universal basic income into everybody's account every month. Um, and which brings us a little bit to why do I think this, and I think that is actually an interesting leap actually to go from Austrian economics into the UBI and the capital consumption theory. So Austrian economics, they have this idea that the business cycles are a result of sort of overproduction of capital. Um, so we have to define capital first of all. So to say it simply, capital is um, productive investment. For example, like a factory.
Yeah.
So you spend like $5 million building a factory, and then ever after you've built it, that factory will help you produce like $1 million worth of, say, milk um, per year. Um,
Capital is
and
something that helps you make something.
right, it helps you make
Okay.
something. It increases productivity. Austrians call it roundabout productions because they talk about how before you had the factory, in an earlier economy, everybody had a milk cow in their backyard, and then every morning they went and milked the cow for half an hour
Uh-huh.
to get a back bucket of milk. And when you build the factory and you spend $5 million on it, that's a lot more trouble and a lot more investment than just having a cow in the backyard. But it is also much more efficient. So you end up having, a bottle of milk, which is like a couple of bucks, which is much cheaper to you than having to spend half an hour every morning to get
Yeah.
the milk, and also having to take care of the cow, all the time, and keep it healthy and feed it, and so on and so forth.
Are you talking about efficient allocation of capital?
Right. So the Austrians have this idea that you need the business cycle, and that the business people have to be sort of disciplined by regular shocks to the economy, which makes everything kind of go up and down, and prevents them from overbuilding the capital.
Hmm.
So this is the point at which I've now departed from Austrian thinking.
Yeah.
And the question I would ask someone who is in that thinking is, what qualifies uh, a capital investment as over investment?
Hmm.
And the classic Austrian answer is that it is investment that is not, um, it's not rational. It is not appropriate for for market conditions. Like
Hmm.
basically, you build the factory, but then nobody wants to buy the milk,
Yeah.
or you're producing something that nobody wants to buy,
Yeah.
and so you've wasted that's kind of wasted capital,
Hmm.
which sort of makes sense if you're talking about an individual business. Sometimes business people will say, I have this great idea for this, great widget. I'm going to build this factory. Everybody's going to love it. And then they build the factory, and then people don't love it. And then they've wasted that
Turns out
investment.
fidget spinners were just a trend for a little while and we didn't need to build 5 billion of them.
Exactly. Exactly. But so that makes sense for an individual business. But if you apply that, across the entire economy and say that, um, you know, you've got all these different business people building different factories and different companies across the entire economy, but they've all overinvested. They were not supposed to build those factories. The market does not support those factories existing,
Hmm.
and you have to think about, what does that mean? What does it mean for the market conditions to not support that level of capital in the entire economy,
It could mean a
not
lot
just
of things, right?
for one? It could mean a lot of things, but one thing that it doesn't mean one thing that the individual case means that the economy-wide case does not mean is that the individual case basically means that you had a bad product. Like
Yeah.
nobody wanted that particular product.
Yeah.
But if you take it into the entire economy, you can no longer say that. You can't say that nobody wants any of the stuff that we're building in the entire economy, that all the different business people and all the different factories and companies are making. Like everybody just doesn't want that stuff. That's not what they want. That doesn't make sense, right?
Hmm.
How can everybody? No, that's not never going to happen.
You must have a mind that thinks about macroeconomics more than I do, because I'm just struggling to imagine it in general.
Right.
Just thinking about a whole economy
But in
wanting.
the single case, yeah, I mean, well, it's weird. It's a
Yeah.
weird thing. Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
I mean, you're struggling. That means you get it
Yeah.
because it doesn't make sense. Because
Fair
it made
enough.
sense in the individual case because the product there was not good product market fit. There was something that you made something you thought it would be great, but everybody else is saying no.
Yeah.
But you can't have that with the entire economy where you have every single factory, on average can make lots of stuff, but the market is saying no to everything. Like they don't want anything.
Yeah. It seems
That
like
is
an overly simplistic point of view. Am I?
so. And I think that, and what happens, I think, which is sort of the place that we are at now, is that it's not that people don't want things.
Yeah.
It's that people don't have money to buy things.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
yeah,
mean,
that's exactly what I was thinking when you said, well, one of the first, when you're like, what if we build something that people don't want? And I was like, well, what if like the amount of money that people have changes, the people who have money changes? What if a lot of different things? What if all the rich people have the money and you made a product for a bunch of poor middle class people and they don't have the money to get it anymore?
exactly, exactly. We're getting there. We're getting to capital consumption theory. So the in the entire, so if you look at capacity utilization in the economy, we're actually there. We're at a century low of like 73%. It was as low as 67%. That is the lowest we've been capacity utilization in 100 years
Hmm.
since the Great Depression, and it's actually the same number that we were at as we were going into the Great Depression. Was We were at about 79%, and then it dropped down to 71% as we went into the Great Depression. We're actually in the same place as the Great Depression. And if you think about it again, if we think about the entire economy as a household,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
you think that as a household, we collectively built all these factories, they can make all this stuff, but then afterwards we go, we're only going to run the factories like 2/3 of the time. Like 1/3 of the time, we're just going to, it's just going to sit there. And it's not because it needs to sit there. It's just going to sit there.
Hmm.
Um, you know, essentially because, we've somehow decided that we don't have money to buy the things in the factory,
Hmm.
which doesn't make sense in the household. In the household model, it's very clear that that is just a waste. You could easily simply say collectively say, well, we're going to, if we can make, $30 trillion worth of GDP in products and services, we're going to
Hmm.
go ahead. We're going to go ahead and make them. And then after we make them, there's, people are going to want them. I mean, people are, you know, people, they still want more products and services. They're not, we're not at post scarcity. They don't have full bellies and, they're not, there's actually huge parts of the population which are really struggling. Um,
People would buy these things if they had the
yeah,
money to buy these things. They
it's
don't have the money to buy these things
yeah,
because we tell them that their job is only worth blank amount of money so that it fits into the labor system.
right.
Yeah.
So you have the odd situation where you have the factories, which are only 2/3 capacity. They're kind of idling a huge amount of the time, and then you also have like large parts of the population, say a third of the population, which is really struggling and doesn't have income to buy things, and they would really like to, be able to have, enough, housing and food and healthcare and whatnot.
Cars.
So the question
Yeah,
is, how did we end up in this situation? And you said something earlier that reminded me of it, that goes into it, and I think that, um, the answer to make a simple segue into the topic, is that it's all at the top, as
yeah,
Andrew Yang has said. The
yeah,
wealthy people.
yeah.
But what exactly do the wealthy people have?
This is
It's not
interesting.
money.
Yeah,
It's not money hoarding, because wealthy people, they don't actually hoard money,
yeah.
because money doesn't make money. It doesn't make a return. Cash doesn't make a return. So wealthy people, they don't just like, kind of sop up all the money in the economy and then put it under the mattress or hold it in their bank account.
Hmm.
Um, wealthy people actually do the opposite. They're actually usually very concerned with taking that money and investing it into
Hmm.
something, and buying a company or buying a factory or real estate or whatever, or gold or whatever.
Now, this is interesting because this is one of my theories. I don't have any like data. This is just a feeling. But one of my
Okay.
feelings is that we are, as a people, kind of over investing.
Right.
Um,
Yeah,
all of our money
absolutely.
is tied up in investments. And when they're tied up in investments, what happens is a lot of people aren't spending money. And when
Yeah,
people aren't spending money, the investments actually do kind of more poorly
yeah,
because people aren't buying. So we need less money in investments, more money in people's hands.
absolutely. Just like we made clear when we talked about the household model, investment is great, but it makes absolutely no sense to invest in productive capacity and then turn around and say, well, we don't have money. So unfortunately, we have the factory, but it's just going to sit there idle a big portion of the time because of something, because we don't have money somehow.
Yeah,
And so
yeah. One of the things, okay, let me say this one thing. I got excited, not excited, but I saw one of the best things to do in this scenario that we're feeling in the economy right now is one of the best investments is selling things to rich people.
yeah,
And like one of the top 10 richest dudes is Arnaud or the French guy who sells luxury products.
yeah,
And it just
yeah,
makes sense because
yeah,
the best way to make money is to get rich people to buy your stuff, not poor
yeah.
people.
Once you understand this, there's lots and lots of things in the economy that will start to make sense, and you'll never be able to unsee it. You'll be like, this all makes sense. It never made sense before I understood this, but now that I see how this works, it all makes sense. Okay, but
I've taken the red
so we have
pill.
to ask
Thank
the
you.
question: how does this happen? Why is the income all why is the income stuck at the top among the wealthy? So to do that, we have to kind of analyze society as two parts. So one part is that wealthy capitalists, they own lots of factories, etc. And then the larger part of society is the worker consumer, and they basically, they work, they make labor income, they work, they make income through selling their labor, and then they take that income, and most of that income goes to their consumption needs. So they spend most of what they make. A worker consumer, um, if they save and invest a great deal, they reach a point eventually. They can reach a point eventually that Robert Kiyosaki calls financial freedom, where you have enough investments that your investments will fund all of your consumption needs.
Mhm.
And once they reach that point, they tend to sort of skyrocket,
Hmm.
because if you can make all of the if you can make enough money on your investments to fund everything, you can usually make a little bit more, or you can save a little bit of money, you can spend a little bit less. There's going to be an excess, there's going to be some savings, and you take that savings and then you invest it, which means that next year you're going to make even more money, which
Hmm.
means you'll have even more savings, and
Hmm.
then you'll invest it again. And
What
so
you're
you can see
describing
how,
seems to be a snowball that rolls
yeah, a
down a
snowball
hill. Yeah,
effect. Like, right,
yeah.
exactly. Like Warren Buffett talks about the snowball effect,
Uh-huh.
and he did that. I mean, he started off with relatively like a few $100,000, and now 50 years, 60 years later, he's multi-billionaire.
Yeah.
And if you calculate it, that he made basically about a 25% return. And if you take a few $100,000 and you make a 25% return on it for 50 years, it absolutely, yeah, it turns into a ridiculous amount of money. That's what happens when people become wealthy capitalists. But most people are still, worker consumers. They
Hmm.
they make their money by selling their labor, by having a job or whatever, and then they spend most of their money usually because they don't make that much, and so usually they're those two things are pretty fairly tight
Hmm.
for most people. So we're separating society into these two parts: the wealthy capitalist and the worker consumer. And from the things that we were just talking about, these two sections of society, they basically represent the capital and the consumption of society. So there's way more worker consumers. So most of the consumption is done by the worker consumer.
Hmm.
And also, especially when worker consumers, when they get income, usually they spend it. But when the wealthy capitalist gets more income, um, they already have their spending needs met like 1,000 times over. They just turn right back around and they invest that extra income again.
Hmm.
So you end up with a situation in society where you have an imbalance, um, too much money in the hands of the wealthy, and this is like
It's happening year
empirically.
over year.
Right, this
Yeah.
is where we're at. We're at a level of peak inequality and rising inequality. And when that happens, when the wealthy have all the income in society, um, they spend all of their income on investing in that productive capital.
Uh-huh.
But the problem with that situation is that the worker consumers are the ones who are supposed to, buy the product of that
Yeah.
productive capital. And when they don't have that money, which right now they don't, empirically, they don't have enough money. They don't have as much money. There's a lot of inequality. They don't have very much money relatively. Then they have trouble consuming the product of that productive capital. So when that happens, one of the things that happens is that the market rate of return and the interest rates, they go down. Um, so
We don't want to talk about interest rates too much, do we? I'm gonna say we don't need to define interest rates and that
don't like
kind of
interest rates.
stuff because
So
that is
interest rates are.
woo.
I mean, gosh, it's the biggest, it's the largest part of the whole theory.
Yeah,
Um,
okay. All right.
because so let's do an introduction on interest rates. So interest rates, most people know about interest rates like you put money in a bank or like you buy a bond, and after like a year you get a few percent or something
Let's
interest.
say my house loan is at 4%.
Right, 4%.
Yeah.
So the bank lent you, all this money to buy a house, and they want, 4%. You're gonna have to pay them 4% on the money you owe them every year. Um, and so a classic question is, why is that so? Why do you have to pay the bank? Why does the bank require you to pay money interest on the money that they lend you? And the classic answer, the standard answer, which I think is correct, is the time value of money. That money now is worth more than money later. And the reason it would be worth more now than it is later becomes clear when you think about capital. When you think about that milk factory that we're talking about um, earlier. So if you have $5 million, that say the bank lent you at 4% interest, you can go and build a milk factory, and the milk factory will produce $1 million worth of milk every year. So in 5 years, it's produced 5 million. In 10 years, it's produced 10 million. The milk factory has, in our hypothetical example, it has a 20% rate of return. So you put 5 million into the investment, and then every year it gives you back 20% of your initial investment. So because capital has this rate of return, which is like a natural, that's like a natural effect. I mean, that's the effect of building a factory, is that you have a return on that factory going into the future. Because of that, that will translate into a time return on money. Because if someone lends you the money, that $5 million, that allows you to build a factory. So it makes sense that you would be willing to pay, say, 4% for that money, because after you invest it, then you get 20% for your troubles. You keep 16%, you pay 4% back to the bank, and everybody's happy.
You give
And
somebody money, you get money back. You get more money
right,
back. If you have money
yeah,
now, you get more
right,
money later.
right. There's a natural. It's not a property of money. It's really a property of capital. As soon as you have capital, which is productive capital, and it generates some type of productivity benefit over time, then you're going to have this effect where, having money in your pocket, having money, upfront is going to be worth, um, paying for. It's going to be worth paying for that money. So in the market, there's going to be an interest rate. But to come back to our capital consumption theory and the scenario that we're in this scenario where the wealth inequality is high. The wealthy capitalists have all this money, and the worker consumer does not have very much money, comparatively. You're going to get into a situation which looks very much like what the Austrian economists were calling, um, over investment.
Mm-hmm.
Because the wealthy capitalist has all that money, they can do lots and lots of investment. They can build lots of factories,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. But because the worker consumer does not have money, after they built the factory, the consumer is not going to really be very good at being able to buy everything that the factory makes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And then they're going to be like, oh, ha, ha, ha. It's because of this naturally occurring Austrian economic theory that, oh, it just happens. Right.
Right.
And then,
Well, right. So in the wealth inequality scenario, what ends up happening is that the return on that factory is going to keep going down
yeah,
as your wealth inequality goes up. As
yeah,
people don't have money to buy the product, then when you build the factory and you try to sell it and it's not very easy to sell, maybe you have to lower the prices. Either way, the the return is going to go down. And especially the return is going to go down because, remember, the wealthy, they have all this income, they have all this money, and they're looking everywhere to invest that money.
yeah.
So there is a greater supply of investment funds and a lower demand for real investment,
Mm-hmm.
a lower demand for factories, because when the factory is built, then they can't sell the product. So that translates into businesses saying, looking at this and saying, hey, look, our factories are already, idle 1/3 of the time. Why in the world would I build more factories when my factories are already, I'm not even using the ones that I have. So
Yeah,
why build more?
yeah.
So they're going to be turning back to the providers of the financial capital, and they're saying, we don't need this money. We don't want it, even though you're going to give it to us cheaply. So do you see that in the
So
market
there's a
for fun?
difference. There's real demand that people would actually want, and then there's
Yeah,
actual demand because of what people actually have the money to buy. And
exactly.
between the two, we aren't actually estimating what the actual demand is correctly. And so it
Right.
makes investment to meet this demand instead of investment to meet this demand.
Exactly. Right. The business people, they can't build the factory, just because people want the product. They need the people to to pay for the product also in our current
Yeah.
situation. And the people, if the people can't do it, then they can't build the factory. So does it make sense that changes the market for investable funds, and you end up with the price of investable funds going down because the demand for factories, demand for
It kind
factories,
of seems like everyone's losing a little bit here.
absolutely, everyone is losing.
Or
Absolutely, it is
losing
a lose-lose
losing
situation.
in that they could be doing much better. Not necessarily losing, like rich people are
Right.
still really rich, but they could be even richer.
They could actually be richer in real terms.
Yeah.
Um, and something really funny happens here because, um, and we're gonna go. We're gonna talk about more stuff.
Okay.
Do you know about bond prices? Do you
Oh
know how
gosh.
bond prices rise when interest rates go down?
Yeah, I think so, because interest rates mean that, okay, so bonds are priced by interest rates. So you make more money when interest rates go down. Just
So,
generally,
right. So,
I
what
don't think we
happens?
need to necessarily know, but it's like bond prices and interest rates. When interest rates go
Right,
down, bonds go
the
down.
prices go up.
Oh, prices go up.
Yeah. So let me tell you the reason that happens. So say you have a 3% bond. So this bond is like a 10-year bond. For the next 10 years, it's going to be paying you 3% interest on your $10,000 investment. 3% interest. But then suddenly the interest rate goes down to say 1%. But you already have that bond in your hand, and the bond is already set up. It's designed that it gives you 3%.
So I'm
So
making more money than the person who's making 1% because
exactly.
they're a sucker and I got it at the right price.
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. So your $10,000 is giving you like um, ten is
30.
giving you like $300 a year.
Good thing I'm not an
Um,
accountant.
but if somebody else wanted to make $300 a year in income, they would have to buy a $30,000 bond because now that the interest rates are only 1%, that's how much they would have to buy. So what happens is that $10,000 bond in your hand, if you go onto the market and you sell that bond, you would actually be able to get way more than $10,000 for it. You'd be able to get like maybe $25,000 for it. You wouldn't get quite 30,000 because maybe you've already got 2 years off of your bond or whatever. But the point is that when the interest rate goes down, the bond price actually goes up.
Makes sense. Yeah.
So what I would say is happening in the economy right now is that interest rates, they also work themselves, all of financial markets, including stocks, for example. So when Warren Buffett, when he tries to calculate how much a company is worth, he's generally going to compare how much the company can earn over the next 10 years, and he compares that to it's almost like a bond.
Yeah.
Like, oh, if I bought $10,000 worth of stock,
Yeah.
would it earn $300 every year for the next 10 years?
Yeah.
If it did, then that would be, about the same, like if a bond did the same
Two
thing.
different investing opportunities.
Right. And
Yeah.
but they're sort of comparable through their returns.
Correct. Okay.
Except the company return the earnings might be slowly increasing. It's a little more uncertain. The bond is for sure. This company, you don't really know, but they're still, but finance professionals, investors, they still compare the two things.
Yeah.
So the same thing that happens to bond prices is going to also happen to stock prices at the same time. So when the market rate interest rate goes down to 1%, or it was 3%, previously, then your bond is going to appreciate. Your $10,000 bond is going to be worth more, and a stock is also going to be worth more
Hmm.
because the stock, to get a bond that would give you as much money as the company as the stock did, um, has that number has just gone up by three times. Like, at the 1% interest rate, you would have to get the $30,000 bond. So your stock is also going to experience almost a threefold like increase.
Hmm.
And so that's actually, I don't know how much you follow financial markets, but Um, that is sort of where we are in financial markets. Like stock prices are actually super, super high, especially for growth companies compared to their earnings.
Hmm. Because of interest rate being low,
Because
everything else high.
exactly,
Okay.
exactly, exactly.
All right. So how do we connect this to cryptocurrency? Are we there yet?
Yes, so we're almost there. So the picture we have, I don't know what you think of the picture we have, but the picture we have is a really of an economy that is sort of unhealthy, sort of messed up in this particular way
For multiple reasons.
for multiple reasons,
Yeah.
but especially the root cause actually being basically wealth inequality
Inequality. Yeah.
and having the wealthy having lots of money, the worker consumer not having enough money. Um, as a result,
And not
uh,
necessarily, and this is probably good to say too, not necessarily a moral objection to these things, but an
right,
actual like functionality problem with rich people having lots of money and poor people not. A lot of
yeah,
people kind of say like, oh, poor people should have more money because it's morally correct. We're not saying that. We're saying it's actually bad for economics, for a market economy to
uh,
run efficiently.
right,
Okay.
yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely.
wanted to make that point real quick.
Good point. We're not even worrying about morals yet. We're just putting them to one side and just looking at what happens to the economy when we get in this situation. And what happens is that real investment goes way down. You get this appreciation in asset prices, which is one of those things that Austrian economists they rail about. They rail against that. They said, "Oh, the Federal Reserve is putting interest rates down way too low, so that's giving you these huge bubbles,
Hmm.
and the bubbles are going to pop."
Yeah.
And they're sort of, I think they're wrong about the root cause. They haven't realized that the root cause is the underfunded worker consumer.
Hmm.
um, but they're right that those low rates give financial bubbles
That
because
the low
of that
rates are
price
not
inflation.
solving the problem.
Right, they're not doing very well at solving the problem. It's kind of like you have not enough money at the bottom of the economy, and you're kind of jamming money into the top of the economy,
And
trying
hoping,
to get it to the bottom, but it doesn't get to the bottom very well, and it just blows up at the top. It's just like kind of inflating at the top,
and
and
it's
that
blowing up on the top and raining down all this crap on the bottom.
well, what you're getting is asset price inflation, and you see real estate.
Yeah.
It's across real estate, bonds, stocks. At this point, it's everything. It's sort of,
Hmm.
Ray Dalio has said it's an everything bubble.
Hmm.
Um, in 2007 we had the financial crisis, which was because of the real estate bubble.
Yeah.
But if you look at what happened since then, we have reinflated that real estate bubble.
Hmm.
It's actually higher and larger than it was before. And then we also have a stock bubble, and then we also have a bond bubble. The entire economy is kind of in this really odd place right
You're
now.
painting a dark picture here, Eddie. I'm not sure I like hearing about bubbles. I thought
Yeah,
bubbles were
yeah.
nice.
And you get these really weird things happening. For instance, like with your GameStop, which where you have excess idle capital running around because it doesn't have a productive outlet,
Hmm.
because it cannot because building factories doesn't make sense in this economy, and instead it just finds different assets to inflate. And right now with sort of like ridiculous effects. You have a company that objectively speaking, they're facing bankruptcy. They're in a terrible industry. They're
Hmm.
in the business of selling something at a store, that because of technology can now be kind of can be downloaded straight to your device.
Yeah.
It's by no means a company that is objectively worth nearly as much as the price got to
Yeah.
last week or the week before that. Um,
No, that I mean that's it's interesting to think about GameStop in those terms because a lot of people think about the moral idea of sticking it to the man.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but it's interesting to think about that the money that went into GameStop is actually just idle money that should be going into other places,
right.
but it's not because there's not necessarily a place for it.
Right. Well, I mean, it's framed as sticking it to the little guy, sticking to the man. But the thing is that price stocks, they don't have rules about who can buy them or sell them at what times, and so there are absolutely are have hedge fund managers or hedge funds or whatever that will also be profiting off of the stocks prices going way up. Um, yeah, and it's generally it's the type of thing that will tend to happen when your interest rates are at zero
Mhm.
and money in terms of interest is basically free anyways. Um, you have that. It's not just a GameStop thing. I keep track of lots of different stocks, and you see it happening across the entire market. I have a stock. I'm an iRobot, IRBT, and that same week it was going up. 10-20% a day. I've been investing in stocks since college about 20 years ago, and in these 20 years, um, I've not seen this type of action in the market in general.
Hmm.
Um, I'm not old enough to have been in the market during the 90s, so I don't know personally. I'm not personally able to compare it to the 1990s tech bubble, but I can
Mhm.
tell you that for the last 20 years, a normal thing is for a stock to go up and down like 1%, 2%, maybe like 5% is a big deal. Nowadays, you pull up your iPhone and you look at the different stocks on your list, and it's like 20%, 50%, 100%. This is absolutely crazy.
It's the Wild
It's
West.
not rational at all. That's crazy. That's crazy that and you understand if you understand capital consumption theory, that's what happens when you take the interest rate down to zero, and it in no the earnings stream no longer matter anymore, and it becomes just an appreciation
Hmm.
game. It becomes an unstable bubble game where the way to profit in this market, the the way to make the most money in this market is to just play that game, is to just get on the next meme and have it go up 10
Meme
times,
yourself
30
into
times,
value.
and then get out at the top.
Yeah.
That's going to be the best money that you can make in the market, instead of investing in a company that builds a factory that makes like 20% a year
Hmm.
in real returns.
All right. So now cryptocurrency.
Right. So cryptocurrency.
So now here's my kind of question then.
Okay. Yeah.
Is cryptocurrency the is it actually a good thing, or is it just a meme to make money on?
So
Or is it both?
right. So the thing about investing that makes it hard is, like, if you think about those stocks, those company stocks, the hard part is that it depends on the future, and no one has a crystal ball. No one knows exactly what's going to happen a year, 5 years, 10 years down the road. Um, so everything in investing in finance sort of depends on the future. There's like a built-in uncertainty to it. So cryptocurrencies, there is potentially a future that, from the situation that we're in today, um, potentially you can, if people keep saying cryptocurrency, um, I don't know if we know how to share screens right now. Let me, uh, you have to allow it, which you might not be able to, you might not know how to do right now. If you can, we'll show it, but if you can't, then I'll just talk about it.
All right. I think
Oh,
I've
nice.
done it.
Oh, nice. Okay. Here we are. Share. Okay, cool. Never done this before. Okay. Okay. All right. Can you see that?
I can see that.
Okay. So this is our Bitcoin chart. Um, and let's go out. Let's look at the big picture. So this is from 2012 to now.
All
It's a
right.
logarithmic scale. So you see that, like, like a five-fold increase is the same amount. So 3 to 15 is this much, 15 to 75 is this much. It's a exponential increase.
So it's gigantic, is what you're saying.
This is gigantic. This
Yes.
is, so Bitcoin in 2012 is like $4,
Okay.
and it's a super, like, nobody knows, nobody's heard of what the heck is a Bitcoin in 2012. I think the first time I heard of a Bitcoin was maybe around here in 2013, and I just read this random article that said Bitcoin was up like 300% this year. And I was like, what the heck is a Bitcoin? That's kind
Mm-hmm.
of interesting. But I only saw the one article. um, didn't think too much of it. And it was at a stage back then when you probably had to be a little bit of a tech head to know how to get some Bitcoin in your hands. Anyways, it keeps, it crashes, it goes up, it crashes, it goes up. But the entire history is basically, from 2012 to now, is basically the history of going from $4 per Bitcoin up
Mm-hmm.
to $40,000 per Bitcoin. With a lot of volatility in the middle, where you get these bull markets. They peak out and they crash and they come down 80%, but then you get another bull market that goes even higher, crashes, but it's still higher than the last bear market. And it's a picture of up and to the right.
Yeah.
Um, to go back to reflexivity, everybody who is watching the Bitcoin prices, whether they are sophisticated or not sophisticated, sooner or later they're going to be watching it and being like, wow, if I bought that 3 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
how much money would I have now? If I bought that 3 years ago, how much would I, this is going to, people are going to see the price going up. And when people, there's certainly a lot of uncertainty and doubt and fear about something as new as Bitcoin, and a lot of questions, a lot of difficulty making sense of what this Bitcoin actually means. But generally speaking, the more people know what Bitcoin is, and the more people that are noticing, wait a second, if I bought it 3 years ago, it was what price? 3,000, and today it's what price? 47,000, um, and rising. They're they're going to be like, maybe I should buy a little bit of that Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
you know. So the so one possible future is that this continues, until. So I guess we can stop the screen sharing now.
Just watch Bitcoin go up $200 in the past 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, it's taking off today. It's kind of fun to watch. And how does that make you feel?
I don't like it. I don't like it at all.
You don't like it because you're not in it. But
Yep, that's true. That's true.
and there's a little bit of regret. It's like, hey, if I bought it last week, it was here, and now I could have made
So,
10% last
but this
week.
is one thing that I argue about Bitcoin
Yeah,
is I say a lot of the things that people list as benefits, I actually count as negatives. They say it's not controlled by the government. It doesn't have blah, blah, blah. It's decentralized. And people like to say it's decentralized and that's inherently better. And one thing that I kind of think is it's not necessarily better. I think of the people, I think that one of the things that I think about crypto
yeah,
is that there still are people making decisions on what Bitcoin is doing. It's just the owners of Bitcoin who are doing it. And so to me, this is like hyper capitalist. Like if you were a
Yeah.
libertarian capitalism
Yeah.
who thought that the market was always right in everything that it does, then Bitcoin is a dream come true.
Yeah.
But if you're somebody who thinks, hey, maybe we need to like, monopolies happen. The
Right.
market's not always efficient. We need to have rules on how these things work because it
Yeah.
it sometimes it doesn't actually work well. Then
Right.
I'm wondering, well, maybe I don't invest in Bitcoin, not because it's not a good investment
Yeah.
itself, but
Yeah.
more because it's a moral, I think for me, it's a moral statement that I believe that Bitcoin, if it ever were to replace or to become a real currency, it would be a very bad thing.
Yeah. It would. I mean, it would be. I don't know that it would necessarily be bad overall. I think it would have many different effects, and some of them would potentially be good, and some of them would be potentially bad. One of the things that I think is very interesting is, again, from capital consumption theory, um, you know, the economy actually needs more consumers. It needs more money in the hands of the consumer worker. And you and I are both Yang Gang, right? I think we're both still Yang Gang, and we're in favor of universal basic income. That probably the easiest way for that to happen is for the government to make it happen, make it so. Um, in the absence of that, because it's a little bit slow. It's actually seems to be much closer than it was a year ago or 2 years ago.
Yeah, no,
I'm at
absolutely.
the catch payments. We're slowly making progress, but who knows how much longer it will be. But on the other hand, the economy actually does need money in the hands of the consumer. I think it's actually fascinating that um, Bitcoin is now within probably one bull market of being as having as much market cap as the U.S. dollar or as gold. And if it does that, that will be a huge increase in the effective money supply. And while you and I think that everybody should have basic income every month, and that would fix. And I think through with the capital consumption theory that would fix the economy in many ways. It would cause the bubbles. It would kind of, instead of popping the bubbles, it would like fill in the bubbles where the company's earnings would actually go up, so that the stock prices actually make sense. Whereas right now they have like no earnings and but huge prices, which is a little bit unstable. Um, but if that doesn't happen, Bitcoin to some degree will actually fill in that role, because you have all these like millennials. Remember, the boomers have all the money right now. The millennials don't have any money, and the millennials are the ones investing in Bitcoin.
Well,
And
see,
so if
then that's
Bitcoin
what I
goes
wonder because
sky
like
high to $500,000,
I saw
suddenly
the other
they do
day,
have money. They do have money.
what I wonder is who are the holders of Bitcoin? Because some people think that it's millennials, but I saw the other day that a guy invested 475 million of his
Yeah,
investments into
yeah,
Bitcoin, and it's,
yeah.
does that mean that we're
Tesla hit the
we're
billion
putting
again.
more? What my question is who's in control? The person, in my understanding, is with most cryptos, it's the holders of the cryptocurrency who are in control. And then
So
I wonder who are the people in control of the currency or who own the currency. And what my guess is, and this is different from your guess. You're saying that millennials and the people who don't have money own Bitcoin, but I
right.
wonder is are the people who actually do have a lot of control in the government already by being rich and having influence and that kind of stuff, do they also own Bitcoin and have influence over Bitcoin? And is it really so decentralized, or is it actually even more centralized than our government processes where we hold real power in the terms of votes?
Yeah. So there's multiple things that are true, um, and it's a complex picture. Um, in terms of the control question, it's actually the miners acting collectively that control it. So if they wanted to make any changes to the cryptocurrency, at least with Bitcoin, it would be the miners that would have to um, all basically all agree and say we're going to kind of upgrade Bitcoin to this new protocol, and enough of them would have to agree for that to work. And sometimes what happens is that they disagree, and when they disagree, then you actually get a fork. So what happens is that say 70% agree, 30% disagree. The 30% go off and build and fork it and make a different cryptocurrency. For example, Bitcoin Cash is a fork off of Bitcoin, and so those 30% of miners, end up in control of the new, forked currency, Bitcoin Cash, and the 70% end up in control of the original Bitcoin. And so it has that sort of it's somewhat democratic among the miners of
Hmm.
the cryptocurrency for Bitcoin, and then each cryptocurrency has its own protocols. So that
Hmm.
is true of Bitcoin. It's different for um, you know Ethereum. It's different for every different cryptocurrency. Every cryptocurrency has its own set of rules, and it has its own rules about how the rules can be changed. But so it is a libertarian's dream. I mean, in the end, you do have it's somewhat democratic, very libertarian way in that if
Hey,
you
I
don't like
think,
Bitcoin, then you don't buy it.
okay. Sorry, I lost you there
Oh,
for a second.
right. And what was the last thing you heard?
Oh, no, I got everything. Your video was out, so
Oh, very
we're
good.
paused.
Yeah,
So you're good.
right. So it is. So it is sort of a libertarian, sort of democratic in a certain way, in that, right? If you don't like it, you don't buy it, and you don't participate. And so the people who bought Bitcoin Cash, they bought Bitcoin Cash. The miners who kept doing Bitcoin Cash, they kept doing it. And it's certainly not, it is not a egalitarian, like where everybody gets the same thing. It's like everybody gets whatever they go for with the resources that they have. And you're right that there is, they've looked at studies of, how much Bitcoin is in each Bitcoin wallet in aggregate,
Hmm.
and it does have the same. You do still have the same like
Distribution.
distributions, yeah, where some people are really rich in
Yeah.
Bitcoin,
Yeah.
and a lot of people are not very rich in Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So you do have that. I do think that if you look at millennials versus boomers, you're going to have a lot more millennial uh, participation than boomer participation.
Fair enough.
Um, because technology generally is that way a little bit. But definitely you still have distribution inequality. That's definitely true. Yeah.
Okay. Well,
So
hey,
what I was saying is that it sort of imperfectly, it sort of solves the inadequate income problem in a very like uneven way, like a very spotty, uneven way. Some people win big. Some people end up, they bought like they mined like 20 bitcoins 10 years ago as for fun, and now they're like now they're really rich, and some people lose out, and some people, so it's sort of I mean, it's sort of that type of a picture.
okay. Well, hey, I have really enjoyed this conversation. I think we can actually talk a little bit more, but
Yeah,
not today.
right.
Um, I
I know you.
I would love to continue, but I'd like to
Yeah,
say, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you.
Um, I'd like to say that I need to stop for today.
Very good. Very good.
Okay. You
Yeah.
have anything else you want to say first, or?
Um, no, I think that was I think it was a great conversation. I definitely enjoyed it, and yeah, I'd love to do this again, and to continue this on another day when you have some more time and a full yeah.
Sounds good, Eddie. Hey, this was great. I really liked it. I'm gonna stop recording now.
Okay.